Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the PES Network webinar on Big Data and Ethics. Thank you all for being here today. I would like to particularly thank our presenters for today. Guido van Hoembeck from the Belgian-Flemish VDAB and Hakon Hertzberg from the Norwegian PES. So this webinar is part of the Future of Work and Digitalization strand, and it is linked to the exchanges that occurred during the PES Network conference on digital technologies and advanced analytics in PES that took place in Brussels in January of this year. And it is drawing from the issues that were raised by several PES during that event that this webinar was constructed in order to share some knowledge on how to embrace innovative practices related to big data, while at the same time taking into account ethical issues and staying into the GDPR framework. The idea is also to stimulate further discussion after this webinar and exchanges between PES. So I will briefly guide you through the agenda for today. We will start with Guido's presentation on AI at VDAB sharing experience, after which we will have a 10 minutes Q&A session, and I will ask you to write your questions in the chat box when the presentation is over. And we will try to answer all the questions. After that, I will give the floor to Hakon with his Big Data and AI in NAV presentation. And again, 10 minutes of Q&A will follow. We will end with final conclusions and reflections, either from the presenters, if they have any, or from you, from the audience. Before we start, I will quickly show you the facilities that you have. So the chat facility on your left, on the left of your screen, where you can post your questions. For the whole duration of the webinar, you are muted. But you can, let's say, interact. You can ask to speak louder or speak softer to the presenter, and you can ask for assistance by clicking on this button. So I will now give the floor to Guido.
Good morning, everyone. It's weird not to see you, but I presume you all see me on my presentation. I want to share with you what we have done in the last, let's say, 1.5 years and where we stand today. So I would like to start with this one. I like this one on the technology. It's neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. It just reminds us that whenever we use technology, that we have to think before we act. So what have we done so far and what we are doing with big data and AI? We do have a couple of things in production. First of all, we have a system, an AI system using big data, which we call Next Steps. And it calculates the probability of finding a job within the next 150 days. In Flanders, we have the strategy that we have a digital first strategy. It means that people first go to our website or apps and do their best to subscribe, to find jobs. If, however, we detect that there are people who subscribed and we detect that they are not at the chance to find a job within the next 150 days, we switch to what we call the call center, and they get calls. So it's used to detect the most vulnerable citizens that need our assistance. Another one is, and I like that a lot, I call it our small diamond. It's the competence finder. Basically, we believe that, and our CEO definitely believes, you all know them, François, that we should not look at all the certificates. It's one part, but we should look at the competences. Now, we use the Rome 3 BIS standards, but you can also use ESCO, of course. And the problem is that, or the challenge is that when you ask people to fill out or to present his competencies, he will take a job that he knows and he will select some of these competencies. But quite often, people have competencies that really span different jobs. So what we see is that when people and even employers who describe their vacancies, if they have to say, well, these are the competencies that we believe we have or we believe we need, that they only do a subset. So we a subset of that standard. So we come up with the idea, would it be possible to use natural language processing to, let's call, detect competencies out of the CVs, job vacancies, core descriptions, right? And well, that's operational today and with success. So whenever we receive a V, we just analyze it. We go through the system goes through the text, and it presents us the competency that it detected. Is it 100% correct? Of course not. Is it 95% correct? I do believe it is. And still people can say, well, I agree or disagree, or I can rate it. So Competence Finder is a NLP system. We even did a small experiment, and we took a video, or today you can upload your video CV, and from that video CV, we then, after you have presented yourself, you get the competencies that we have detected during your talk. Then one of the most powerful things that we've built so far, or that it built, is what we call JobNet. You all know the problem of job matching the right CV to the right job vacancy. And about 1.5 years ago, we decided to try, well, to do an experiment and see if we could do job matching using AI. Now, we succeeded, and I can briefly explain how it works, but basically the system learns from the market. That's why we call it market-driven job matching. Learns what the preferences are of people with a specific profile. So basically the system first gets all the information. This type of people, they prefer this type of job vacancies, and it learns out of that, so that once you come in and you give your profile, then the system can say, well, we believe that these are job vacancies that would suit you based on the experiences of others. That's a completely different way of matching, because we also have matching with Elise from WCC, where you have to define your own rules. Here the system detects basically the rules. And for instance, the system learns from the market. It learns that nanny and taking care of children is basically the same. It learns that people who are living to the east of Antwerp, they prefer not to work to the west of Antwerp due to the traffic jams. These sort of things, small things, but very interesting ones. And just by the fact that the system, let me put it this way, how does it work? It translates vacancies into a vector, into a series of numbers. It translates job vacancies into a series of numbers, and then the whole magic of machine learning is taking place. Now, due to the fact that we transform these texts into numbers, we become language independent. So basically today we can already match a French CV on a German job vacancy. The JobNet is language, the matching itself is language independent. That's a very nice thing. We also use AI for gender neutrality of job vacancies, and well, the results were rather okay. Only 7% of job vacancies tend to be not gender neutral. But a nice conclusion was that women they don't take into account whether it's gender neutral or not, right? They just apply for the job they like, while men, when they only believe that it might be more for women, they don't apply. So women, in this case, are much more proactive. What are we working on today? We do believe that in this era where people will have to change from jobs, jobs will disappear, new jobs will appear. Then the question is, what would be the job reach of a person? And what type of jobs could this person do, given the fact that he might lack some competencies? And we use a graph database for that, also big data. We hope to get this into production, let's say by September, but that will help us in helping people changing or evolving their career, knowing that the job that they do today is disappearing. That's the transformation that our society is going through. Based on that, we are linked to that. We also will add what we call skill extraction. It's a lower level, it's a more detailed level of competency, and we do that to to detect what is the skill evolution in the market, right? Skills are not needed anymore, but new skills are coming up. We even believe that we would be able to detect the new skills, right? Even if they are not really well defined today. And why skills and not competencies? Because competencies are more sentences, while skills are more words, or a combination of words, 2-3 words. And it's more related to, it's closer to the language of people. And then, of course, I don't know whether you have that problem with duplicate vacancies. We have the problem that the same vacancy might be entered into our system from different companies, and it's not good for the customer to receive, say, 4 or 5 times the same vacancy. Now, these companies are very creative in changing the vacancy, such that when you read it, you say, well, it looks alike, but it's not the same. The system is detecting the differences. Well, it detects that it's equal, right, or close to, which will help us in our service to the customer. What are we doing? We are experimenting with RPA. I do have plans to do some virtual private assistants, so voice, but that is a more difficult one because with all the dialects we have in Belgium, that might be a problem the way people pronounce words. And I do believe that when we provide something using voice, there are 2 things that I want to be taken into account. First is identity and access management. How does the system know that Guido says it's Guido, using voice and voice only? So that's more, I believe it's called biometric identity access management. And the second one is, how do you make this the system sounds natural, and what type of services are you going to provide through that virtual private assistant? So that's something that we are still investigating. So then let's come to the topic, and that's digital ethics. Very soon we realized that we had to be extremely careful in what data would we use, what data should be used, and how would we use this data. And you know, and most of you have already seen that digital ethics and privacy is very high on top of the agenda. Even Gartner, I'm working in IT, and even Gartner says that for the next 10 years, digital ethics is one of the key elements that would, next to privacy, that we should take care of. the most simple framework that I found is when we use AI, right? We shoot AIs for the good. And what does it mean? To me, the three key principles is: can the customer or the user of our system trust us, trust the system? So trust is an extremely important aspect, because if people don't trust your system, your algorithm, the results of your algorithm, you're dead. Second one is transparency. We should be transparent. We should be transparent in what data that we use and how we use it, right? And why we use it. So no hidden agendas. And the third one is we should do it to the benefit of the citizen, or to the benefit of the society. And I know that these are three rather, well, you can't say that, you can't express this in black and white, but these are the three aspects I do believe that when you do something, and we do it, right, that we say, well, can the system be trusted? Are we transparent, and is it to the benefit of? We already use this small framework, but we are working on deeper levels on that. So recently, the European Commission published what's called the principles, and I wanted to share this with you. And we are not going through these different aspects, but I just put this in the presentation, also the URL, so that you can read it yourself. I strongly recommend you to look at this and maybe start from here, right? Now, one of the challenges the biggest challenges that we have is bias. These are basically my key messages to you guys. Be aware that when you use big data, it's very powerful. Apart from the fact of trust, benefit, and transparency, you might have unwanted results, and you all read already about Amazon that created a system for hiring, but it turned out that the system was not in favor of black men. Right now, this one is a good example of bias in your model. There was no bias in the data. The data were factual, right? The data were right, but the system learns out of these data, so the model is biased, right? Another thing, of course, is you can have bias in your data. Are your data complete or complete enough? Are there any holes in it? What is the quality of your data? So these are things that you should take into account. Also, what elements of your data are you going to use to create your model? For instance, for JobNet, we exclude gender, right? And some other things, just to make sure that the model is not biased. So bias is one word I do believe that you should be aware of and you should really work on. I come back on that on the next slide. Can you note? Yes, please. I also added a reading list, so the interest in digital ethics is growing. Very good, because if you see what happened with the American elections, previous one, that was a good example of a very bad example. Right? How they abuse data, not in the interest of the citizen. You couldn't trust it, right? They weren't transparent, and it was not to the benefit. It was to the benefit of some people. So I do believe that digital ethics is an essential part of your big data and AI strategy. So I do believe that each and every one of us, we should create or write down and eventually publish what we call my digital ethic rules of conduct. Now, be aware that we should also impose these these rules and maybe add some specific rules for third parties. I mean, we don't have the talents in house, so we work with external parties. We should also impose our digital ethical rules to the external parties and maybe impose some additional rules to these third parties. And then it's something that I got from a Gartner document. They say, and I truly believe it, and at VDAB we are going to have this role, and this role will be part of the DPO office, data privacy, yeah, privacy officer. So we will call it the digital ethicist, right? He is a person, or she is a person, who forces us to think about the unintended consequences. What is the value, right? So it's also the person that should should evangelize the ethical principles into the company, right? And as I said, it's part of a BPO office. Now, yesterday I sat down with well, I can name the people I'm working with. I'm working today with Accenture on a proposal they made. Can I have the next slide? Yeah. So we have the first iteration of ethical principles, and let's say a more final version will be presented on the 6th of May to the board of directors. But I'm also taking some steps towards making sure that we detect bias in data in an automated way, right? Today we start from our own test, and also during the data cleansing we make sure that we avoid bias, or we remove bias if there would be any. But I do believe that, and more companies are doing that, I do believe that bias detection, correction could be done in an automated way. We have a research share with the University of Leuven, and we will work on that. And we are also looking at the Accenture algorithmic fairness tool. I don't know yet what the outcome will be, but these are experiments I'm going to do to make sure that we avoid bias both in our data as well as in our models. And recently, there is, I forget the name of the company now, there is a small company in Belgium, in Flanders, and they focus on the quality of your model. How well is your model? So these are things that we should introduce. Right? When we write programs, we do quality assurance on the outcome of the programs. We should do quality assurance on our big data and on the outcomes of our models. And that is the next step, I believe. So these are the first set of digital ethical rules that we have today. It should have an ethical purpose. So what is the reason that you do it? It should be ethical. Who decides whether it's ethical or not? That's a problem, of course, right? And they should comply with the values of your company, of your. Of course, we avoid creation and proliferation of unfair bias. We want to be transparent in data and models. We respect the privacy by design principle. The good thing is that when you use machine learning, you can do it perfectly on anonymized data. I don't need the specific data of I need some data, but not the more privacy-related things. However, maybe when you think of inclusion, something that I believe will become very important in the coming years. Inclusion means making sure that people who do not have access to the job market today, how can we give them access to the job market using technology? Right? And there are many ways that you could do that. It will require some change in mindset of the employer, of the employee. It will change the way we look at jobs. But also there, you might need some data to bridge that gap between the capabilities and the results of a job. And there we might, well, we will have to be very careful what type of data, physical data, psychological data, you could use or might use or might need to bridge that gap. But that's in a very, very early stage. I added a set of questions, I believe. Yeah, this one. This one I already used for my, no, just this one. No, can you? Yeah, exactly. These one are the questions I already asked to my suppliers of machine learning and well, AI in general. We are not going to go through all of them, but I really encourage you to read them because I believe these are very valuable questions to make sure that when somebody builds something for us, that we also can trust them, that there is transparency and they focus on benefits. And well, then some more reading material I added for you, so you can just look it up. But there is quite some good stuff that I encourage you to go through and learn from it. That basically concludes my presentation, and I might, yeah, this is in Dutch, I translated that, it's not really necessary. So maybe I should answer some of the questions. The questions regarding PES staff, can you tell us if VDAB has defined what is an ethical behavior? To be honest, not yet. And it's a very good question. What is ethical? And now we're going to the philosophy, right? And well, guys, up to you to decide. And maybe we as PES, as a group of PES, we should maybe define what we believe is ethical in our world. It depends. So it's a very, very difficult question, Jean-Pierre. And then do you have an AI in production? Have you had any issues with, for instance, press co-workers at local offices? How did you create trust for them? Yes, we do have AI in production. The next steps is even used and embraced by our workers because the system helps them in focusing on the right people, right? And we get very good feedback. So that system was created to support our people. There is one rule which I didn't mention yet, but we do not create systems that take decisions. We create systems that support our people or support the customer in taking decisions. But it's always the human being who takes the decision, right? Press, well, we go to very good press. But one thing though that I want to share with you is creating an AI system is one thing. Experimenting is easy, well, easy. You give them a sandbox and they experiment and they build the model. But two things. A, 70% to 80% of the work when you're working with big data is data preparation. What data are you going to use? Data cleansing, data preparation, transforming data into other forms, right? Take that into account. And secondly, bringing an AI system into production is different from bringing a Java or C# application to production. The need for data is different, right? It has to be real time, it has to be fed real time, and you have to set up these data pipelines. So AI is nice, but bringing AI into production, it's a different world. Right, so make sure that you take that into account also from the very beginning. Do you mean that, so Darius is asking, do you mean that the ethics in digital understanding may differ from the daily life? This is very personal. I'm going to answer. No. No, I don't believe it is very, it is Guido van Umek who's saying this. You cannot separate ethics in the digital world from ethics in the daily life. Absolutely not. We're dealing with humans, right? So we're dealing with ethical principles. But I agree that what is ethics, as I already said, that's a very philosophical question. Thank you, Darius. Well, this more or less concludes my presentation. If there are more questions to be asked, I will see them and I'll give you my view on it. Thank you.
Yes, we will still have some time at the end in case there are some questions left that were not answered. I will now give the floor to Akon, who can now switch his camera on and his sound and make his presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the floor and for the very good presentation from Guido. It really is setting the scene for today's topic. I will try to follow up with some remarks on how we manage big data in the Norwegian PES and how we are starting up a work on ethics and legal framework in this context. I speak on this topic from my point of view as head of politics in our organization and also as the head of compliance. As you might know, the Norwegian PES consists of a merger of the Public Employment Service, the administration of over 50 different benefits and social schemes, as well as responsible for social security system together with the municipalities. So this broad spectrum of responsibility gives us data on everybody through their whole life, from child benefit being the first benefit and funeral benefit being the last one. So we have it all the data, and big data is really the right word for our data collection. Big data obviously provides unprecedented opportunities to drive information-based innovation in an organization like ours. And Guido have given a lot of good examples on this in his presentation. A lot of the same processes are also going on in our organization. But I will have focus on the compliance and the legal frameworks and how we think about that in our organization. Big data creates risk both to individuals and society unless effective governance is in place. The governance must be sensitive to retience, the harm to individuals when the data is not used because of ambiguity on how to apply laws, standards and regulations, as well as to privacy. So governance has to be holistic, taking into consideration concepts of good and bad from all potential stakeholders. And this is really pioneering work, and I'm very happy that the DG Employment and the PES network can cooperate in this work. This work should consider the benefits and the risks to the individual, for the society as a whole, and for the parties conducting big data discovery and application. Moreover, data protection requires a full understanding of the potential impact of big data on the full range of human rights, not just those related to privacy. And I see that in my work almost every day, that bringing in other aspects than privacy and different legal frameworks represent a call for new skills. We need to cooperate with university sector and all research we can take advantage of. We have a special cooperation with the Faculty of Law at the University of Oslo, and also for at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Oslo. To establish big data governance, we believe that there is a need for common ethical frame based on key values and a need for an assessment framework. The Norwegian PES are currently going through major digital and organizational transition. And we are totally changing the way we develop new services based on agile method. This, together with a quite offensive and very successful recruitment of a team of data scientists, calls for a team of legal coaches to balance all these opportunities. So we are at the current establishing a new team of legal coaches that also that will work very together with these new agile teams and also with the data scientists. Creating good governance calls for a good balance of solid knowledge on the business legal framework, in our case the benefits and the PES services, the privacy law framework, and to make this work combined with ethical perspective and framework. I think it's very important to acknowledge that this is new to us. We need to think, we need to rethink and think again. We have to find the right balance. We have to be able to see our children in the eyes in 20 or 30 years, knowing that we made an effort in finding the right balance between the data-driven development and ethics and legal rights. So how to come about this effective governance of big data analytics? Facilitates quality outcomes that can create economic, research and social value while still preserving the ability for individuals to define themselves where appropriate and avoid predestinations. A common ethical framework provides the necessary foundation for an accountable governance system for big data. The first step we think is building such a process is defining the core values and described as I'm going to describe later on, from which ethic-based rules and outcomes can evolve. Whether it is an individual conducting the analysis or a team, mechanisms are necessary to assure process assessment is responsible and answerable to the stakeholders. For any process to be responsible, it must rest upon a foundation of established societal norms, not only for privacy, but also for citizen and subject protection, intellectual rights, liberty, freedom, and free expression. Those interests may vary from country to country and from legal system to legal system. However, the core interest in fairness remains critical to any discussion on basic rights. Big data analytics often remain invisible to individuals, even when big data insights affect them. While transparency is important to market and regulatory checks and balances, internal processes that have and can demonstrate integrity are vital. Many definitions of big data have been articulated in different fields over the past few years. We have Kukias and Major Schoenberg's definition is probably the most applicable one. They have write that big data refers to things that one can do at a large scale that cannot be done on a smaller one, to extract new insights or create new forms of value in ways that change markets, organizations, the relationship between citizens and government, and more. Big data analytics bring together very large, diverse, and often unstructured data sets. Therefore, organizations conducting with big data discovery and application must conduct due diligence on the source of data to assure that data is appropriate for the intended purpose. Data may be inappropriate for a number of reasons. The data use may be prohibited by law or contract restrictions. Sometimes the data is too fragmented or its accuracy is doubtful. In other instances, the data may have been provided, created, or observed in a deceptive fashion. The ethics of big data analytics rests upon the due diligence of the appropriateness of the source of data. Due diligence processes must be proportional to both societal and individual risks and the data's significance. Inadequate due diligence regarding the source data is comparable to the data scientists not understanding the characteristics associated with the data they use, which creates the risk of inaccurate correlation that may lead to inappropriate outcomes. In addition to due diligence, it is important to understand that the discovery phase is where one finds correlation between data sets that would not be visible without the muscle of modern high-speed computing and advanced analytical processes and technologies. In the discovery phase, one does not apply those insights, but only conduct the research to eliminate them. Any implications of insights would occur in the application, not discovery phase. The discovery phase typically begins in the repurposing of data already in existence. The discovery phase does not usually involve collections of data directly from the observation of the individual as part of its process. Therefore, the discovery phase is not usually personally impactful. Moreover, ethical big data analytics entails more than source due diligence and includes the consideration of a full spectrum of individual interests and human rights. It is not just a function of principle related to data protection or privacy. Global and regional text define individual interests or rights and include principles that discuss employment, basic economic needs, family, free expression, and broad dispersal of benefits of technology. Any ethical frame for big data must take all these interests into consideration. Privacy is an underpinning for many of the interests, but not for all of them. Retenants risk avoiding processing because one finds resolving the conflict between risk too difficult, which leads to the loss of meaningful benefits to individuals and society as a whole, is much a violation of fundamental rights as the loss of privacy. So digital predication should empower, not limit, the individuals can achieve if left on their own free will. The value established for the starting point of the developing an assessment framework necessary to assure a balanced ethical approach to big data, and the 5 values are where we are at this point is beneficial, progressive, sustainable, respectful and fair. We will also take into account the points the EU Commission has released and as Guido had on a slide earlier today. But prior to this value-based analysis, there should be an understanding of the intended purpose of the big data analytics. This understanding should clarify why the analysis will take place. Is the purpose to identify data correlation that will relieve broad questions, or is the problem statement more narrowly defined? It is during this stage that the evaluation should ascertain if there are any legal, contractual, or overarching organizational values that affect the integrity of the analytics as understood. I will now go through the ethical framework as it is where we are now. The first one is beneficial. The act of big data analytics may create risk for some individuals and benefits for others or society as a whole. These risks must be counterbalanced by the benefits created for individuals, organizational, political entities, and society as a whole. Some might argue that the creation of new knowledge is a value-created process itself, while big data does not always begin with a hypothesis. It usually begins with a sense of purpose about the type of problem to be solved. Data scientists, along with others in an organization, should be able to find the usefulness or merit that comes from solving the problem, so it might be evaluated properly. The risk should also be clearly defined, so they may be evaluated as well. If the benefits that will be created are limited, uncertain, or the parties that benefit are not the one at risk from the processing, those circumstances should be taken into consideration. An appropriate mitigation for the risk should be developed before the analysis begins. The next point is progressive. Because bringing large and diverse data sets together and looking for hidden insights or correlations may create some risk for individuals, the value for big data analytics should be materially better than using big data analytics. In the anticipated improvements can be achieved in less data intensive manner, that less intensive processing should be pursued. One might not know the level of improvement in the discovery phase, yet in the application phase, the organization should be better equipped to measure it. This application of the new learnings to create materially better results is often referred to as innovation. There are examples of big data being used to reduce congestion, manage disaster relief, and improve medical outcome. There are all examples of material improvements. However, there are other examples where organizations may analyze data and achieve only marginal improvements, but use big data because big data is new and interesting. Organizations should therefore not create the risk associated with big data if there are other processes that will accomplish the same objective with fewer risks. The next point is sustainability and sustainable. All algorithms have an effective half-life, a period in which they effectively predict future behavior. Some are very long, others are relatively short. Models used in the mortgage securitization market to assign risk to subprime mortgages in the first decade of this century are examples of data scientists not understanding how the models themselves would influence the behavior of various market players. The change in behavior affects the model validity, helping to facilitate a market decline. The half-life of an insight affects sustainability. Big data analysts should understand this concept and articulate their best understanding of how long an insight might endure once it is reflected in application. Big data insights, when placed into production, should provide value that is sustainable over a reasonable time frame. Considerations that affect the longevity of big data analytics include whether the source data will be available for a period of time in the future and whether the data can be kept current, whether one has the legal permission to process the data for the particular application, and whether the discovery may need to change or be redefined to keep up with evolving trends and individual expectations. For example, an early intervention of big data analytics led to a significant reduction in fraud when the discovery phase produced new insights showing a significant proportion of identity fraud was not identity theft, but rather came from synthetic or manufactured identities. Later insights show that the fraudsters changed the makeup of those fake identities as organizations improved their processes to catch them. As a result, the predictive algorithms were continually refined to sustain their effectiveness in the detecting and preventing fraud. There are situations where data, particularly de-identified data, might be available for the discovery phase, but would not be available in the application phase because of legal and contractual restrictions. And these restrictions affect sustainability. And this is also an example of why we need to build new competence and new teams that can explore these legal and contractual restrictions in the context of big data. The next point is respectful. Respectful relates directly to the context in which the data originated and to the contractual or notice related restrictions of how the data might be applied. European law, GDPR, restricts processing not incompatible to the defined purpose. Big data analytics may affect many parties in many different ways. Those parties include individuals to whom the data pertains, organizations that organize the data, organizations that aggregate the data, and those that might regulate the data. All of these parties have interests that must be taken into consideration and respected. For example, when we in NAV detect fraud, this might display data pertaining to individuals that they would not expect to be used for example, employment-related purposes. Organizations using big data analytics should understand and respect the interest of all stakeholders involved and affected by the application. Anything less would be disrespectful. The next point is fair. And Guido was also referring to fairness. And fairness relates to insights and application that are product of big data, while respectful speaks to the conditions related to and processing of the data. Norwegian law prohibits discrimination based on gender, race, genetics, or age. Yet big data processes can predict all those characteristics without actually looking for fields labeled gender, race, or age. The same can be said about genotypes, particularly those related to psychical characteristics. European guidelines on application of data protection directive continually references fairness as a component of determining whether a use of data is incompatible or a legal basis to process is appropriate. Big data analytics, while meeting the needs of the organization that is conducting or sponsoring the process, must be fair to the individuals to whom the data pertains. The analysis of fairness should look not only to protecting against unseemly or risky actions, but also at enhancing beneficial opportunities. Human rights speak to shared benefits of technology and broader opportunities related to employment, health, and safety. Interfering with such opportunities is also a fairness issue. In conducting this fairness assessment, organizations should take steps to balance individual interests with integrity. This was a brief overview of the process of establishing a good governance for our use of big data. I think we are at a very interesting but also very demanding starting point, bringing all these points together and making it work and realizing the really finding out how this can really work in real life, if you could say so. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Okay. So you can start asking your questions if you want. Yeah. Okay, there is a question for Akon. Akon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear us? Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a question for you on asking, don't you think that issues of big data ethic may be solved one of the way with creation of countrywide big open data centers?
Could you mute the? Thank you. Thank you for your question, Darius. Yes, for one part of the big data ethics, the creation of countrywide big open data centers will be a good answer. We are looking into that in Norway and on, but I think that would be the solutions for, or to put it in another way, I think we can have countrywide big open data centers, but I think in an organization like ours, there will also be a lot of big data analysis that are on restricted data that will be locally or only inside our organization due to law and privacy restrictions. Yes, PES would absolutely be a part of such a center with all our data, both the PES and the. So we are, the Norwegian government is looking into establishing data or processes. Could you please mute, Cecilia?
Yes.
Darius.
Can I comment? Yeah, sure. Can I make a small comment on this one?
Yes.
My personal belief is, because we have this discussion also in the AI for Belgium working group, it's more on the federal level, you might resolve the issue of the quality of data and trusted data, but you do not have control over the use of these data. So you might still have bias in your models. So it will partially resolve some of the ethical questions, but ethics is also about the use of the data, the purpose of what you do with this data. And Darius, I don't believe that this will be the solution to the issue of big data ethics. And then,
I agree. So it solves the problem of what data could be used between different state organizations, because that is quite a big problem. But the finding out what's compatible on a legal basis is a big question anyway.
Darius, I do believe that this is a very interesting discussion, because in the past we used some open data for some, I call it basic statistics. Now we are using these data for other purposes, right? And until the person is not recognizable, yes, but still you can abuse these data, and there can still bias in your model, even if the data are correct. For instance, we don't use personal data, but as it was already mentioned by Hakon, with the latest techniques and quite some powerful CPUs, you might deduce some individual data out of the data that you have. Today we train our models on anonymized data, so you can do already a lot of with this data, but still it all depends on the purpose. What is the purpose of the use of this data? And there we again come to trust and transparency. If people would like to use these data, and watch out, I'm in favor of sharing data, let that be clear. I mean, if I would have some data of other federal organizations or service organizations, it would help me in providing a better service. But we should stay transparent on what we use and why we are using it and for what purpose, and again avoid bias. So yeah, it might.
I agree, and
yeah,
we have the same challenge in Norway, because we have our organizations, we have reached a point where we are making very good not recognizable data, but we see that making the analysis, we have to have a framework for what kind of analysis we want to do, because we have a lot of health issues that we can know a lot. We can create a lot of analysis that we might not that the society doesn't want to have, if you understand what I mean. So that is I think that is the biggest ethical question. What are we? What is the gut feeling? Because my data scientists today say that in the end we use our gut feeling on what we are making analysis on unrecognizable data. But what kind of knowledge is it okay that a pest organization really makes? Is there any framework or is there any stop points in what we can analyze that and make analysis on?
There might be situations where you do not want to know what you could know.
Exactly.
Especially, I mean, just think of what you could do with DNA. We could maybe reconstruct the face of a person based on its DNA.
And we have this. We have the sick leave is part of our business processes, and we see that it's very. That makes a lot of ethical problems, because we try to detect who we should talk to early in the process of a sick leave, and because we know a lot of why people are sick and a lot of about their health, that can make a very powerful tool. But I don't know if we want to go there, if you understand what I mean. You can tell from people's weight and people's sickness history and what kind of work they are in, and you can tell a lot about who we should talk to and who we shouldn't talk to. But is this okay? Is it okay? And it's for the same purpose. It's for the purpose of bringing them back to the labor market as quickly as possible. But is it okay to take into consideration whether they have a drinking problem or not, their weight, their gender, or is it not? The people in the offices do that today, but they do it inside their heads. But is it okay to bring these heads into computers?
We should come back also on a question of Michelle. How do you identify and validate skills when the skill set is specified only by the client, and if it is not verified by a competent body? Michelle, I want to thank you for the idea, because we don't do it yet, but it's a very nice idea to see whether the competencies that somebody claims he has, whether we could find proof that he has it based on whatever we have from him.
I agree.
Because it also depends on how much weight you give to these competencies in your decision making. If it's highly weighted, then of course it becomes more important. But I take this idea with me, and I'm going to share this with my AI experts to see whether this could be a very nice improvement of trusted data. Thank you.
So we still have some time for questions on this topic.
Maybe I can add two more things.
Of course.
Hey guys, there are two more things that I want to share with you. Basically, we are also working now on what we call the VDAB data platform. Like Hakan already mentioned, it's more than structured data that you use. It's streaming data, it's clicks, it's even video that you could use, whatever. So it's more than a relational database that you use today or whatever. So we are working on a VDAB data platform where we will be able to bring together all these type of data, also real time, so that we can set up data pipelines for all these different initiatives. But one of the things is, and I'm taking this with me from this presentation, is that we should even more focus on the governance of that platform and always ask for the purpose of the usage of these data, whoever will use it. It's also our responsibility that if people whoever uses our data, that they will use it for purposes that comply to our principles. That is, I believe, the right that we have when we share our data. And then one last remark, but it's more a little more in the future. But what we will see is what they call the democratization of AI and machine learning. Personally, I'm scared of it, because once citizens and programmers or whoever can just create models based on data that they collect, we might get into a situation where systems and services occur that do not comply with the basic rules of ethics. And especially when people are going to use our data to do some experiments, be very careful when people say, well, we will use a standard model, we use your data, we put your data through it, and then we have a model. That's basically what's coming. And I believe it's our responsibility to make sure that in our market, if I can say it like this, that these things should not happen, and we should make our market, the HR market, aware of the dangers of AI, the possibilities, but also the danger of AI. I also believe that's could be one of our topics in our mission.
Another question.
Another question for me, has it been straightforward to find a legal purpose for the use of data that has been necessary to build and run the AI models you now have in production? Well, every piece of data that we used is checked by the DPO. So we apply the principle of privacy by design. So all these data, they can be used. That we checked it up front. And of course, for some data, we also ask permission of a governmental organization whether we could use this data, yes or no.
Okay. So we still have some 10-15 minutes for questions or other considerations, conclusions, reflections from the presenters. Okay, we received some input.
Should bias be covered by law only? I do not believe that. I mean, we should go further than law. Should we adjust our models counter societal bias? It will not be the model. The model will provide you the possibilities, and then again, I do not believe, and I strongly say this also within VDAB, the system does not take a decision. The system supports the decision making of our people, right? and we will never say you have to do this, or the system will never say this is what you should do. It's some, how should I say, some filter that we put on or some additional assurance that we put on top of this. And again, bias, I already said, bias is indeed tricky, because even if there is no bias in your data, just by the use of this data, you might get a biased model. So I don't believe that of course we should look for the Amazon example is very good, because the data on itself was not biased. They just measured what type of people they hired and what type of jobs they did, right? That's just factual data. So the data were not biased. Of course, there was bias in the data. The data basically reflected the bias in the heads of the people. And then the model, like Hakan said, the model just brought up the bias of the of what's in the heads of the people. So data might not be biased, might be very factual, but the knowledge that is in there can be biased. So we have to be very careful there.
There was also the remark from Jean-Pierre here. I don't know if any of you has some inputs to add about this.
Well, I can only agree. We must have in mind the PSI directive. There is a lot of things to read and to comply with, and that's why I insisted to put these type of things without DPO. Right? There should be an organization like Hakan has, and I'm jealous of what you have set up, man. That's what we should do, right? I put at the DPO level, and we do have legal support there, but it's correct that we should make sure that we are aware of all the directives, of all the legal issues, but also all the aspects that could influence ethics and privacy.
Yes, just to fill out, I think what is, we also have a DPO in his, I'm in charge of him, but what I see is that it's so much more complex and it's also interesting in my responsibility for politics and making new laws, because when you go to government and propose new laws to make analysis like this law or right, you also need to work on the in the governmental structure so they can understand what the law really will pave the way for, because it's you have to have good ethical discussions also in the parliament before you make laws that make you use big data. And that is in Norway, we see it, I think we see too little discussions in the making of laws for big data or use of big data.
I recently read an article that America or some places or some states in America are working on that, but I don't remember anymore in which state. But there is already some lawmaking going on to do this type of thing.
And I really think that it is where the social security or the PES, I think PES and social security and the use of digital instruments and big data is a very really interesting also research area. It's the most important part of the society, and there are so many tricky questions in how you can use data and how you can prosper in social security and PES organizations. So we need to really acknowledge this as a big question that we need to cooperate on in the European context as well.
Okay. So, if there are any other questions, we can still have 5 minutes to take them. Or we can directly give for the last 10 minutes, 5 minutes, the floor to the presenters if they want to make some, if they want to conclude or make some final reflections.
My final reflection is, I wish you all the best and luck and with your experiments, but you have to experiment. There's so much value in big data and AI, and I can tell you, if you don't do it, if we don't do it, others will do it. So if we want to stay important in the market, I believe that this is one of the key elements to stay important in our market. I also encourage every one of us to share these type of experiences, and it's something that I'm really looking forward to other cases, to other use cases, to other ideas, questions. So please share. We should share these with us and help each other in doing the right things. So thank you.
Akon, do you want to?
I'm very. What Guido says is very good summing up. I think we have to acknowledge that this is pioneering work, that we really could prosper from mutual learning in the PES network. So I really hope that Jean-Pierre and his people will follow this up, so we can see more of this experience through the PES organizations.
Okay, so I think that will conclude it. Before you leave, I just want to mention that we will keep the discussion open on Circa BC on this topic. So if you want to make other comments or ask other questions, that will be the place to do it. We will also have all the materials, which are the slides, which you saw, and the registration of the whole webinar. They will be available for you, and we will send you an email on how and where to find all this material. We will also send you a feedback form very soon that you will have to you can complete to give us your opinion, and so that we can improve for the next one. And if you have questions, you can contact us. So yes, thank you very much for attending, and we hope it was a useful occasion to share some knowledge. And yes, thank you very much.
Bye everybody, all the best.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye bye. Have a good day.